Andre Price was 38 years old when his wife took everything. The house he'd renovated room by room with his own hands. The savings account he'd spent a decade building. The life he'd deferred his own dreams to protect. Diane walked away with all of it, and she walked straight into the arms of the man she'd been planning her exit with for 16 months. Andre walked away with his car, his tools, and a notebook full of ideas she'd never once asked about. She told her lover he wouldn't fight it, that he'd just absorb the loss and disappear. And for 3 years, it looked exactly like she was right. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Diane turned on the television. A Forbes segment was airing, the kind that stops you mid-step. The kind with a name on the screen you recognize. The kind with a face you used to wake up next to. She picked up her phone. She called once. She called again. By the time 4 hours had passed, she had called that man 57 times. He never answered a single one. What Diane didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined when she signed those divorce papers, was what Andre had been quietly building while she wasn't watching. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house on Delmar Court looked different at dusk. Andre noticed this every evening, the way the brick caught the last of the light and held it, warm and amber, before the dark came in. 4 years ago, that brick had been painted over in a flat, dirty beige. He had stripped it himself. Weekend by weekend, layer by layer, until the original clay color came back. Until the house looked like what it had always been underneath. That was how he approached most things. He pulled his Camry into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. 38 years old. Lead structural engineer at Mercer & Dunn. 11 years of building a career in rooms that rarely put his name on anything. Doing work that kept those rooms from falling down. It was a particular kind of invisibility. The kind that only became visible when something went wrong. Nothing had gone wrong. Not professionally. He got out of the car and rolled his shoulders back. The evening air smelled like cut grass and someone's barbecue 2 streets over. He stood on the front walk for just a second, looking at the porch he had replanked in the 2nd summer, the window trim he had repainted in the 3rd, the door he had rehung himself because the original hung 3 degrees off true, and it bothered him every single time he came home. A man's work was his word made tangible. That was Clifton Price talking, somewhere in the back of his mind. His father had said it so many times, it had stopped being a quote and started being a fact, like load capacity or tensile strength. You either built things right, or you built things that would eventually fail. There was no third option. He went inside. The kitchen light was on. Diane was at the counter, phone in hand, thumb moving, and she looked up when he came in with the particular brightness she deployed in the first seconds of a room, the one that felt like warmth until you had lived with it long enough to recognize it as a setting rather than a feeling. "Hey, you," she said. "Hey." He set his bag by the door. "How was your day?" Slow. She set the phone face down on the counter without breaking her smile. "Had a walk-through this morning that went nowhere. Client doesn't know what she wants." Diane's staging business, Holloway Home Design, operating for going on 14 months, had a lot of clients who didn't know what they wanted, and a lot of walkthroughs that went nowhere. Andre had funded the launch himself. The LLC filing, the website, the initial inventory of furniture pieces and accent items she used for staged listings. $8,000, written from their joint savings without hesitation, because he believed in her the way he believed in a well-drawn plan. You invest in the foundation, and you trust the structure to follow. The structure had not followed. He didn't say that. He had never said that. The business would find its footing or it wouldn't, and either way, the household didn't lean on it. That was what he was for, the load-bearing part. He understood that role without resentment. A good structure didn't resent the weight it carried. It was simply built, to hold it. "Sorry to hear it," he said. He moved to the refrigerator and scanned it with the automatic efficiency of a man who cooked most of their meals. Chicken, peppers, half an onion in a zip bag. "I can do stir-fry. Whatever you want," she said, already looking at her phone again. There was a version of Diane that he had fallen in love with at 33. The one who filled a room by knowing precisely how to move through it, who laughed at exactly the right moments and remembered the names of every person she met, and made each of them feel briefly singular. He had marveled at her then, still did, in the abstract way of a man observing something beautiful from a respectful distance. The distance had been growing for a while. He had named it to himself as personality difference. She was social and external. He was interior and still. She needed more stimulation than a quiet house and a husband who came home tired. He had told himself this so many times it had become load-bearing in its own way. A beam he'd installed to keep a certain ceiling up. He filled a pot with water and set it on the burner. That was when he noticed it. Not immediately. It arrived the way things arrived when you were trained to identify structural inconsistency. Not as an alarm, but as a small wrongness that didn't match the rest of the room. He was standing at the sink, washing his hands, and it came to him through the warm kitchen air. Cologne. Faint. Settled. The way a smell settles when the person wearing it has been gone for 30 minutes or more. It was not his. He ran the water a little longer than he needed to. He turned off the tap. He dried his hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle and reached for the cutting board. Behind him, Diane scrolled her phone, her back to him, her thumb moving in the quiet. He began to cut the peppers. The tablet had been acting up for a week. Andre had been meaning to look at it. A syncing error, most likely, the kind of low-level technical irritation that accumulated during busy stretches, and waited for a quiet moment to be addressed. Tuesday morning gave him that moment. Diane was still asleep. The house was still. He sat at the kitchen table in the gray pre-dawn, with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, and the tablet open in front of him, working through the settings menu with the same patient, methodical attention he brought to everything. He found the iCloud configuration. There was a conflict. The tablet had been bouncing between his account and the shared family account, the one he and Diane had set up years ago for shared calendars and photos. He tapped to resolve it. The screen loaded. It wasn't his files. He understood what he was looking at in pieces, the way understanding sometimes arrives, not all at once, but in a sequence of small recognitions, each one landing before the next one comes. A message thread. Diane's. The contact at the top was saved as 2 letters, RW. He should have closed it. He knew, even in that first second, that whatever was in that thread would change the shape of everything. There is a moment, brief, irretrievable, where a man can choose not to know something. Andre sat at the kitchen table of the house he had built with his own hands, and he let that moment pass. He read all of it. 16 months of messages. Not the frantic, fragmented language of something new and electric. Not the breathless shorthand of people who couldn't believe what they were doing. This was something else entirely. Settled. Coordinated. The way 2 people communicate when the decision has already been made, and what remains is logistics. RW was Russell Wave. The name appeared in full in an early message, and then only as a signature style. Confident, brief, the messages of a man who expected to be understood without elaboration. A real estate developer. That much was clear from the thread's texture. References to properties, to timelines, to a project in the 4th Ward he was closing on in the spring, and references to Andre, not by name at first. Your husband. The situation. The current arrangement, clinical language, the language of a man who viewed people as positions in a spreadsheet and adjusted them accordingly. Russell had laid it out with the calm precision of someone walking through a project plan. Roderick handles the legal side. He knows how to structure the asset claims. We time the filing for after Q2, so the salary projection works in your favor. The consulting firm he keeps talking about, that gets listed as a marital asset. Future earnings, speculative value. Roderick will know how to frame it. Roderick, her brother, her divorce attorney. Andre set the coffee cup down very carefully. He scrolled further. The thread thickened in the middle. 6 months of near-daily messages. The architecture of an exit being constructed brick by brick. Russell advising. Diane confirming. The two of them calibrating timing, language, strategy. It was not the record of an affair. It was the record of a business plan. The affair was incidental. The plan was the point. Near the bottom of the thread, 4 months old, he found the message he would remember for the rest of his life. Diane had written it. Short, certain. No cruelty in it. And that absence was its own kind of cruelty, because cruelty would have suggested she had thought about how it would land. He won't fight it the way a harder man would. He'll be hurt, and he'll let it go. That's just who he is. Andre read it twice. Then he picked up his phone, opened the camera, and photographed every visible message on the screen. Methodically, top to bottom. He scrolled and photographed again. He did this until the thread was fully documented. Then he closed the application, powered off the tablet, and set it on the table beside his cold coffee. He sat with his hands flat on the table. Outside, the neighborhood was beginning to wake up. A car started somewhere down the block. A bird was working through something urgent in the oak tree by the fence. The kitchen was the same kitchen it had been 20 minutes ago. Same cabinets he had installed, same countertop he had sealed twice to get the finish right, same window above the sink where the morning light would come in around 7. He sat in it and let himself understand the full weight of what he now knew. Not what he suspected, not what he feared, what he knew. That night, after Diane had gone to bed, he opened the household savings app. He checked it the way he checked most things, thoroughly, starting from the beginning. He had not looked at it carefully in months. He trusted Diane to manage it. He had said that to himself so many times, I trust her to manage it, that it had become a reason not to look rather than a reason to feel secure. The account should have held $47,000. It held $9,200. He stared at that number for a long time. Then he tapped into the transaction history and began to scroll. The withdrawals were spaced out. Irregular amounts, irregular intervals, nothing that would trigger an automatic alert. The smallest was $400. The largest was $3,200. They had begun 11 months ago. They had not stopped. Each transfer went to the same external account. He copied the account reference number and searched it. An LLC came back. Holloway Design Holdings, registered under Diane Holloway. Her maiden name. He searched the registered agent. Wave Property Management Group. Russell Wave's company. Andre set his phone face down on the table. He did not move from the chair. The kitchen was dark except for the range light he always left on. A small amber glow, the same color as the brick he had uncovered on the front of this house, year by year, until it looked like what it had always been underneath. He sat in it. He did not sleep. But that was a private matter. Andre drove to work the same way he always did. Same route. Same left turn off Calder onto the expressway. Same NPR station he kept low enough to think over. He drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road, and his mind doing what his mind did when something needed to be processed, working it quietly, from the inside, the way a foundation settles. He had a name. He had documentation. He had a number with a $sign in front of it that told him exactly how long the plan had been running. What he needed now was an attorney. He waited until he was in the parking garage at work, engine off, before he pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a colleague from his firm, Marcus Webb, a structural project manager who had gone through a divorce 2 years prior and come out the other side intact. Andre trusted his judgment. More importantly, Marcus was not someone Diane knew well enough to call. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. "She any good?" Andre asked. "She's the reason I kept my retirement account," Marcus said. "Call before noon. She fills up fast." Her name was Patricia Okafor. Andre called at 8:47 a.m. The receptionist offered him a Thursday slot. He asked if anything was available same day. A cancellation opened at 4:15. He took it without hesitation and thanked her and hung up. He sat in the parking garage another minute. Then he got out, took his bag from the back seat, and went to work. The retainer was $3,500. He paid it from an account Diane had never seen. A savings account he had opened at a credit union when he was 26 years old, the year after his father, Clifton, sat him down and told him something he had carried ever since. "A man keeps something for himself," Clifton had said, "not because he doesn't trust his wife, because he respects himself enough to know that life moves in ways you can't always plan for. That money isn't a secret. It's a foundation. Every structure needs one the other walls don't know about." Andre had added to it slowly, over years, a few hundred here, a few hundred there. It was not a large account, but it was enough. It had always been enough for exactly the kind of moment his father had described, without knowing which moment it would be. Patricia Okafor's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she took on and off like punctuation. She read through what Andre had on his phone, the screenshots, the transaction history, the LLC registration, without interrupting him once. When he finished, she took her glasses off and set them on the desk. "How long have you been married?" 5 years. "Has she filed?" "Not yet." "Then we move first." She picked up a pen. "Tell me everything. Don't skip the parts that make you look bad. I need the full structure." He told her everything. He went home that night and made dinner. He did this for 3 weeks. He cooked. He asked Diane about her day. He watched television beside her on the couch they had picked out together at a furniture store on a Saturday afternoon 3 years ago, when they were still the kind of people who did things like that together on Saturday afternoons. He performed nothing. He simply continued, calm, deliberate, giving her no reason to accelerate whatever timeline Russell had designed. In the mornings, before Diane was awake, he worked. He built the case the way he built everything, from the ground up, with nothing left exposed. He logged each piece of documentation in a spiral notebook: date, source, file name, location. The screenshots were organized chronologically. The financial records were cross-referenced with the LLC's registration date. He found 2 of Russell's development properties in a public deed database and traced them backward through the filing timeline until the connection was visible and clean. He emailed everything to Patricia in encrypted folders. She confirmed receipt each time with 2 words: "Got it." The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday morning, not at the house, at his office. A process server came to the front desk of his firm and asked for Andre Price by name, and the whole transaction happened in the small lobby where his colleagues came and went for coffee. The papers were handed to him in a manila envelope with the return address of Roderick Holloway, attorney at law. Andre signed the acknowledgement. He thanked the process server. He went back to his desk and sat down. He understood immediately what it was. Not just the filing, the delivery. Russell had coached her on this. Serve him at work. Make it public, even in a small way. Establish from the very first moment that he is the one reacting and she is the one moving. It was a psychological opening move. The kind of thing a developer who had spent years outmaneuvering people on deals understood instinctively. Andre opened the envelope, read the filing from the first page to the last, and sent a copy to Patricia by end of day. The divorce lasted 9 months. Andre did not have the money to match Roderick's billable hours, and Roderick was thorough. He was aggressive in the precise professional way of someone who believed his client's version of events and had been given a clean story to work with. He argued the house, the savings, the speculative value of the consulting firm that existed only in Andre's notebook. He framed those notebooks, those careful, detailed plans Andre had carried for years, as evidence of future earning potential subject to marital division. The judge agreed on the house, agreed on the majority of the joint savings. The consulting firm valuation was disputed and ultimately reduced, but it cost Andre months of litigation and legal fees he paid from the foundation account until it was nearly gone. When it was over, he had his car, his tools, his license, his notebook. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the east side. The carpet was the color of old mustard, and the radiator knocked every night at 2 in the morning like something trying to get out. He set his notebooks on the kitchen counter the first night. No table yet, just a counter and a lamp and a box of his things on the floor, and he stood in the middle of the room and looked at them. He incorporated Price Structural Group 28 days later. 3 years passed. Not easily, not quickly, but they passed the way things pass when a man has decided to stop waiting for the right conditions and simply build. One contract, one project, one delivered proposal at a time. He was 41 when the Forbes producer called. 41, with a firm that had grown to 11 people and 2 active federal contracts, and a reputation that had begun to travel further than he had pushed it. The feature ran on a Tuesday morning in late October. Cable segment, print companion, the kind of coverage that arrived the way real things always arrived, without the fanfare he'd imagined, and with more weight. He had not told Diane about it. He had not told anyone who would tell Diane about it. He did not think about Diane much by then. He was busy. Diane was home that Tuesday morning. She had the television on in the kitchen of the house she had won in the settlement. The house Andre had renovated room by room, the house with the brick front he had uncovered himself, the house where he had once stood at the kitchen sink and registered the faint presence of another man's cologne without saying a word. She was making coffee when the segment started. She wasn't watching at first. She was scrolling her phone, half listening, the television doing what televisions do in empty kitchens, filling the room with the sound of other people's lives. Then a word caught her. Then a name. She looked up. His face was on the screen. Andre's face. Steady, composed, unchanged in the way that certain people don't change when the world starts going right for them because they were always exactly that person. The correspondent was describing Price Structural Group. Federal contracts, $40 million in 3 years. A team that had grown from one man with a notebook to a firm that now held infrastructure projects in 3 states. Andre Price is not a man who announces himself, the correspondent said, over footage of Andre walking a job site in a hard hat, pointing up at a steel frame with the practiced ease of someone who understands exactly what he's looking at. He builds until the building speaks for him. The coffee overflowed the cup. Diane set her phone down. She called him. He didn't answer. She called again. The morning moved in the way mornings do, minutes accumulating into an hour into 2, and she kept calling. Something in her could not stop calling, the way you can't stop pressing on a bruise once you've found it. She called from the kitchen. She called from the living room. She sat on the couch in the house he had built, and she called his number 57 times over the span of 4 hours, and not once did the call connect to anything but his voicemail. His voice on the recording was the same voice it had always been. Calm. Brief. You've reached Andre Price. Leave a message. She did not leave a message. Andre was in a board meeting when the calls came in. His phone was on the conference table in front of him, face down, the way he always kept it in meetings. He was 3 agenda items deep into a federal project review. walking his team through a load analysis on a highway overpass they were consulting on in Georgia. He had a pen in his hand. He had a set of drawings in front of him. He was doing what he did, working precisely in the place where the work mattered. He did not feel the phone vibrate 57 times. At lunch, he picked it up. The screen showed a number he recognized. 57 missed calls logged in a clean, vertical column, each one a minute or two apart, the last one placed 11 minutes ago. He looked at it for a moment. Then he turned the phone around and held it across the table toward Tasha, who was sitting across from him with a menu open and her reading glasses on. She looked at the screen. One eyebrow went up. Slow, precise. The full measure of everything she was choosing not to say, compressed into a single expression. Andre put the phone back in his pocket. "I'll have the salmon," he told the server. "And more water, please." The elevator opened on the 14th floor at 7:43 in the morning, and Andre stepped out carrying a coffee and a leather portfolio he had owned for 6 years. The office was already half alive. 2 of his project managers were at their desks. Someone had started a pot of fresh coffee in the break room. The glass walls along the south end of the floor caught the early light and held it, the whole space glowing in a way that still caught him off guard not because it was grand, but because it was his. He had picked this floor specifically, 14th, high enough to see the city's skeleton, the cranes, the frames, the half-finished structures reaching up from the ground, the way structures always did when someone decided to commit to something. He liked being able to look out and see the work. Reminded him of why the work mattered. He set his coffee on his desk, hung his jacket on the hook behind the door, and opened his portfolio to the day's first page. He did not think about the 57 calls. He thought about the Georgia overpass. By 9 o'clock, he had reviewed the load analysis from the previous day's meeting, flagged 2 calculation discrepancies his team needed to revisit, and sent a clear, specific email about both. Not harsh, just precise. That was the thing about structural problems. Softening the language did not change the math. He walked the floor once before 10, not to supervise, just to move, to see what was on people's screens, to be the kind of present that made people feel settled without making them feel watched. He had learned early that a good engineer on a job site doesn't stand over the work. He stands near it. There's a difference. 70 people worked here now. He knew most of their names. He knew which ones had families and which ones were still building toward that. Which ones had student loans and which ones were mentoring the interns the way he had once wished someone had mentored him. He did not think of this as generosity exactly. He thought of it as accurate accounting. You pay into a structure. The structure holds. He had not always had 70 people. The first year, it had been 1. Him, a laptop, the notebooks, and an apartment with a radiator that knocked every night like something that wanted out. He had taken every contract price structural group could physically fulfill. Residential inspections, small commercial consultations, a foundation assessment for a church in the East End that paid him $1,400 and took him 3 full weekends. He had done the work himself, written the reports himself, invoiced and followed up and filed every document himself, because there was no one else to do it, and because he had decided, quietly, in the way he decided everything, that he was not going to fail at this. He called his father every Sunday morning. The calls were brief. Clifton did not believe in telephone conversation the way some people did. As a form of emotional processing, a place to spread your difficulty out loud and hear it change shape. He believed in knowing whether his son was still standing. "Still going," Andre would say. "Keep going," Clifton would say. That was usually enough. Tasha had made the first real difference. She had watched the divorce with the particular fury of someone who knew exactly what was being taken from exactly the wrong person, and she had channeled it the only way it was useful, practically. She hired Price Structural Group to consult on a commercial property renovation she was managing on the South Side, a 4-story mixed-use building that needed a full structural assessment before her investor group would release the next round of funding. Andre had delivered that assessment 2 days ahead of schedule. He had caught a load-bearing deficiency in the third-floor framing that 2 previous contractors had missed, documented it clearly, and provided a remediation plan that saved Tasha's investor group an estimated $40,000 in what would have been very expensive surprises. She sent his information to 3 people inside a week. Those 3 people told others. Within 6 months, he had a municipal contract with the city's infrastructure office, a sidewalk and retaining wall assessment program, unglamorous work, the kind that never made news, but that required exactly the level of methodical precision that Andre had been applying to everything since before he could name it as a skill. The federal bid came in year 2. A highway infrastructure consulting contract. Competitive, heavily documented, the kind of proposal that required a firm to demonstrate not just capability, but institutional reliability. He had prepared that proposal over 11 weeks. He had treated every page of it the way he treated a load calculation. No assumptions, no approximations, no rounding in the wrong direction. He won it by a margin that surprised everyone except Tasha, who had read the proposal and told him plainly that the other firms didn't have a chance. Forbes had come to him, a journalist who had heard about the federal contract through a source in the infrastructure space, who reached out through his business email on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. He had almost declined. He was busy. He did not need the profile to know what the company was worth. Tasha had looked at him when he mentioned it and said, "Don't insult the building by hiding it." He had done the interview. By 4:30, the floor had thinned out. His project managers had filtered toward the elevator in 1s and 2s. The cleaning crew would come at 6. Tasha appeared in his doorway at 4:47, with her jacket still on and a plain manila folder in her hand. "You have a few minutes?" "Yeah," he said. She came in and pulled the chair across from his desk out with one hand. She sat down the way she always sat. Direct, settled, no preamble about whether this was a good time, because with Tasha it was always a good time, or she wouldn't have come in. She set the folder on the desk between them and slid it across to him. "It's about Russell," she said. "His current position. I've been tracking it for a while." She paused. "There are some things in there you need to see." Andre opened the folder. The first page was a printout. Clean margins, no handwriting, the kind of organized document Tasha produced when she wanted the information to speak without her having to push it. He recognized the format. She had sent him things like this before. Due diligence reports on properties her investment group was considering. She knew how to build a case on paper. He read slowly. He did not rush through documents. Never had. "Start with the top sheet," Tasha said. "The financial overview." He was already there. Russell Wave's development portfolio, as of 8 months ago, carried an estimated $31 million in active debt across 9 properties. 3 of those properties had been refinanced within the past 18 months, pulled against their equity to fund new acquisitions. 2 active development projects were running an average of 14 weeks behind their investor-promised delivery dates. One of his primary financial backers, a private development fund out of Atlanta, had quietly reduced its committed capital on a co-financed project by 30% without a public announcement. Tasha's contact inside the fund had flagged it. "He's running the whole thing on momentum," Tasha said. "As long as everyone believes the portfolio is performing, the confidence holds. But the actual numbers underneath?" She shook her head once. "The foundation is not what it looks like from the street." Andre turned the page. The second sheet was different. This one came from a title search. He could tell by the formatting, the property registration codes along the left margin, the legal descriptions, the ownership transfer dates stamped in gray type. He read it twice before he said anything. "Walk me through it," he said. Tasha leaned forward slightly. The LLC, the one registered under Diane Holloway, with Russell's management company as co-registrant, it was active for about 7 months total. In that window, it acquired 2 investment properties, a duplex on the east side and a commercial unit out in Fairfield County. She pointed to the addresses on the page. The down payments on both came from the LLC's capital account. The account the transfers went into, Andre said. Yes. He looked at the dates on the transfer column. The first property was acquired 4 months before Diane filed for divorce. The second, 2 months before. Both purchases were completed before a single court document existed. And after the decree, he said. 6 months after the final decree, both properties were transferred out of the LLC into Russell's sole ownership portfolio. Tasha's voice was level. She had clearly rehearsed how she was going to say this, not to soften it, but to make sure it landed straight. The LLC was dissolved 30 days after the second transfer. By the time the divorce was legally concluded, there was no LLC to audit. Just 2 properties sitting clean in Russell's name, purchased with capital that, on paper, never existed in your marriage. The room was quiet for a moment. Andre looked at the transfer dates again. He looked at the original withdrawal amounts he had documented 3 years ago. $3,800 drained from their joint savings over 8 months. He looked at the down payment figures on the title sheet. He was an engineer. He understood load distribution. He understood what it meant when the numbers in 2 separate columns lined up exactly the way these numbers were lining up. "Tasha," he said. "What word would Patricia use for this?" Tasha looked at him directly. "Actionable," she said. "I asked her the same question, off the record, before I put this folder together. She used that word without hesitating." Andre closed the folder. He set it flat on the desk with both hands resting on top of it, the way he sometimes rested his hands on a set of blueprints when he was finishing a review. He did not speak for a moment. He was not suppressing emotion. He was organizing information. There was a difference, and Tasha, who had known him long enough to understand the difference, did not rush him. "Set up a meeting with Patricia," he said. "Tomorrow morning, if she has it." "I'll call her tonight," Tasha said. "Thank you." He meant it fully, without ornamentation. He picked up the folder and slid it into his portfolio. Tasha stood, pulled her jacket straight, and picked up her bag. She paused at the door. She looked like she wanted to say something else. He could tell by the slight stillness she got when she was editing herself. She left without saying it. That was also Tasha. He drove home at 6:15. The city at that hour was amber and gray, the last of the daylight catching the upper windows of the buildings he passed. He took the long route without deciding to. He parked outside his building and turned the engine off. He sat there. He opened his phone. He had screenshotted Diane's message 3 years ago, transferred it across 2 new phones since then. Not because he looked at it often, because he believed in keeping documentation of the things that were true. He won't fight it the way a harder man would. That's just who he is. He read it once. Then he locked the phone, put it in his jacket pocket, and got out of the car. Patricia Okafor's conference room was the kind of room that did not try hard. No artwork on the walls, no decorative anything, just a long oak table, 8 chairs, and a window that looked out over the parking garage across the street. The room said, "We work here." That was enough. She was already seated when Andre and Tasha arrived. A yellow legal pad in front of her, a pen uncapped, her reading glasses on. She stood to shake their hands, firm, brief, professional, and sat back down before they'd fully settled into their chairs. "I've looked at the preliminary materials Tasha sent last night," she said, "but I want to go through everything you have. Start from the beginning." Andre set his portfolio on the table and opened it. He had organized the documentation the way he organized everything, chronologically with a numbered index on the first page. He walked Patricia through it in sequence: the tablet discovery, the iCloud sync, the message thread. He placed the screenshot printouts in front of her, each one dated, each one labeled with the contact name and the timestamp. Patricia read them without expression. She turned each page with the same steady pace, absorbing rather than reacting. Andre appreciated that about her. She was not performing gravity. She was doing the work. Then the financial records, the joint savings account statements showing 8 months of withdrawals, 43 separate transactions, each one small enough to avoid triggering an automatic alert, each one documented. He had pulled the statements himself before Diane knew he had a lawyer. He had photographed every page. Then the LLC registration. Diane Holloway, registered agent. Russell Waves Property Management Company, listed as co-registrant. Filing date: 11 months before the divorce papers were served. Patricia's pen moved for the first time. She wrote something on the legal pad, circled it. Then Tasha's folder, the title search, the property acquisition dates, the down payment amounts, the transfer of both properties out of the LLC and into Russell's sole ownership portfolio, completed within 6 months of the final decree, the LLC dissolution 30 days later. Patricia set down her pen. She took her glasses off and set them on the pad. She looked at the documents spread across the table. 3 years of careful, methodical documentation laid out in order, and was quiet for a moment. "This is a strong case," she said. "Civil fraud. Conversion of marital assets. The LLC structure isn't sophisticated enough to withstand scrutiny once a court sees the timeline. The acquisition dates, the transfer amounts, the dissolution. It tells a clear story." She paused. "Both names go on the filing. Diane as the registered owner of the vehicle, Russell as the direct financial beneficiary of the scheme." "That's what I want," Andre said. Patricia nodded. She picked up her pen again. "You said you had a specific question for me." "I do." Andre folded his hands on the table. "Russell Wave is operating a development portfolio on investor confidence. He's over-leveraged. He has at least one major backer who's already quietly reduced their commitment." He let a beat pass. "What does a civil fraud filing do to a developer in that position?" Patricia did not hesitate. "It makes every investor he has pick up the phone." She said it flatly, the way someone states a fact about gravity. Fraud litigation attached to a developer's name is not something institutional money sits with quietly. They pull their people in. They run their own review. They put commitments on hold until they understand their exposure. She looked at him. A developer operating on momentum cannot absorb that kind of disruption without something giving way. The room was quiet for a moment. "File it," Andre said. Patricia made a single note on her pad. "I'll have a draft by end of week. One more thing." Andre leaned forward slightly. "Roderick Holloway. I want him to receive a courtesy meeting before this becomes public record. Not to negotiate anything. Not to give him a chance to respond to the filing." He was precise about the distinction. "I want him to see the documentation directly, without his sister's version of events standing between him and what actually happened." Patricia studied him for a moment. "I can arrange that. Later this week, before we file." "That works," Andre said. She was already writing. They rode the elevator down in comfortable silence. Outside, the morning was cool and bright, the kind of October day that felt like a clean page. They walked together toward the parking structure. At the base of the ramp, Tasha stopped. She looked at him. Not with the expression she used when she was about to say something important. With the one she used when she had already decided not to say it, but wanted him to know she was feeling it. He nodded once. That was enough. That was always enough with Tasha. He called Clifton at 7:15 that evening. His father picked up on the second ring, the way he always did. No greeting, just presence. "The filing is moving forward," Andre said. "Patricia has everything. She files by end of week." Clifton was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a man processing something he had been waiting a long time to hear. "All right," he said. Andre waited. There's something I've been holding on to, Clifton said slowly. 3 years now. Didn't know when the right time was. A pause. You think now is it? Andre said, Yes, now is the right time. Clifton took a breath. Not the kind a man takes before he speaks. The kind he takes before he commits to something. 2 months before she filed, Clifton began, I went to a Chamber of Commerce dinner. Downtown. Delmont Burke dragged me out of the house. You remember Delmont? Used to do tile work on the east side. I remember him. He wanted to introduce me around. Said there were developers there, people who might have renovation work. So I went. A pause. Toward the end of the night, Delmont brings this man over. Big smile. Nice suit. The kind of man who walks into a room like he already owns part of it. Clifton's voice was even, unhurried. Delmont says, Clifton, this is Russell Wave. Does real estate development all over the metro. And Russell puts out his hand and I shake it. Andre did not move. Then Delmont tells him who I am. Says I'm Andre Price's father. Your boy does structural work. Clifton stopped for a moment. And Russell. He didn't even blink. He just looks at me and says, Andre's a good engineer. Solid guy. Said it like he was talking about a coworker he barely knew. Then he smiled, and he moved on to the next person. The line was quiet. He shook my hand, Clifton said. Looked me in the eye. Said your name out loud. And the whole time, he was already doing what he was doing. Andre stood at his kitchen window. The city below was lit and moving, people going wherever they were going, indifferent to everything. He pressed one hand flat against the glass and felt how cold it was. He did not say anything for a long time. Not because he was angry. He was angry. That was present, steady and low, like a hum in the walls. But anger was not what was keeping him quiet. What was keeping him quiet was the specific, terrible clarity of it. Russell had stood in a room with Andre's father, had heard the name Clifton Price, had connected it immediately to the man he was in the process of hollowing out, and he had smiled, had said something pleasant, had moved on. Not because he was reckless, because Andre had never once registered to Russell as a threat. Why did you hold it? Andre asked. His voice came out steady. Because I didn't know what it would do to you, Clifton said. You were already down. I wasn't going to hand you something that heavy when you didn't have solid footing yet. A pause. And then you got footing, and I kept waiting for the right time. He was quiet for a moment. I think this is it. It is, Andre said. You were right to wait. He heard his father breathe out slowly. All right, Clifton said. They stayed on the line another minute without speaking. Two men who didn't need to fill silence to fill the space between them. Roderick arrived at Patricia's office the following afternoon at 2 o'clock sharp. He came in a gray suit, no tie, his posture professional, his face carefully neutral. He sat across from Andre and Patricia and set his hands flat on the conference table. Not folded, just resting, like a man who wanted to project openness. Andre placed the documentation in front of him. The same organized stack, the same numbered index. He let Roderick read. No narration, no commentary. Patricia sat to Andre's left and said nothing. The only sounds in the room were the slight shifting of paper and once the distant sound of a car horn from the street below. Roderick read for nearly 10 minutes. When he looked up, his face was not the same face that had walked in. I didn't know about the LLC, he said. I want you to know that. I didn't know about any of the transfers. I know you didn't, Andre said. Roderick absorbed that. He seemed almost surprised by it. The absence of accusation from a man who had every right to offer one. She told me, he started. He stopped, reorganized. She told me the marriage had been dead for 2 years before she filed, that you were both just going through motions, and that Russell, he paused. She said Russell came after, that it wasn't the cause, it was just what happened when things were already over. Andre looked at him. Not hard, just directly. "I know what she told you," he said. The sentence was short. It carried everything. Roderick had nothing to put against it. He sat for a moment longer, looking at the documents in front of him. Then he stood, gathered himself with visible effort, and buttoned the front of his jacket. He thanked Patricia. He did not thank Andre, and Andre did not expect him to. At the door, Roderick stopped. He looked back. He opened his mouth like he had one more thing to say. Then he seemed to decide against it, and he left. The door closed. Andre sat in the quiet conference room for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and found Diane's number, unchanged for 3 years, still in his contacts where he'd never had a reason to delete it. She answered on the second ring. "Andre." Her voice was careful, surprised she was saying his name out loud. "Sunday," he said. 6 o'clock. My father's house. Come for dinner." A beat of silence. Then, "Okay," she said. "I'll be there." The porch light was already on when Diane pulled up. She sat in her car for a moment before getting out. The house looked the same as it always had. The same white trim, the same small garden along the front walk that Clifton tended every spring without assistance or acknowledgement. She had sat at the table inside that house for 5 years of Sundays. She knew how it smelled. She knew which step on the porch creaked. She got out of the car and rang the bell anyway, because she understood, without having been told, that she was no longer someone who walked in. Clifton opened the door. He looked at her the way he had always looked at her, steady, unreadable, giving away nothing he hadn't decided to give. He stepped back and let her in without a word. The dining room was set with his good dishes, the blue and white ones with the gold rim, the ones she had only ever seen at Thanksgiving and Christmas. The sight of them did something strange to her chest. Andre was already at the table. He stood when she entered, not as a performance, just as the thing a man does when someone walks into the room. He looked the same, and he looked completely different, and she could not have explained either one. He had always been steady, but the steadiness used to have something soft behind it, something that bent toward her. What she was looking at now was different, not hard, just finished, the way a structure looks when the last piece is in place, and there's nothing left to adjust. "Diane," he said. "Andre." She sat down across from him. Clifton came from the kitchen with food and set it on the table without ceremony. Roast chicken, green beans, rice. He sat at the head of the table, and they served their plates the way people do when everyone in the room is being careful. The first few minutes were stilted. Diane asked about the office building she'd seen in the Forbes segment. Andre answered her. The square footage, the floor count, how long the build-out took. Plain details, delivered plainly. She asked about Tasha. He said Tasha was well. The words moved back and forth like items being passed across a counter. She had expected anger. She had been preparing for anger since the moment she accepted the invitation. She had rehearsed responses to it on the drive over, turning his imagined accusations into answers she could give without falling apart. But there was no anger to respond to. Andre ate his food and answered her questions, and was exactly what he had always been in this house. Present, unhurried, without performance. And the absence of anything to push against was somehow worse than any confrontation she had braced for. Clifton said almost nothing. He ate and listened and occasionally set down his fork, and the silence coming off him was the particular kind that made a person aware of exactly where they were sitting. After the meal, when the plates had been pushed back, Andre reached down beside his chair. He placed a single document in front of her on the table. Maybe 6 pages, held together with a binder clip. He did not explain it. "Read it," he said. She read it. The LLC, the transfers, the property records, the timeline of what moved where and when, and whose name was where on each document. 6 pages that made 3 years of her life visible in a way she had never fully allowed herself to see. It laid flat like that. not as a series of individual decisions, but as a sequence, a construction, something that had been planned. When she set the last page down, she didn't look at him right away. "Russell was the one who structured all of it," she said. Her voice was careful. "He told me it was standard, that it was just how people protect themselves in a divorce. It went further than I. Diane." She stopped. Andre's voice was not raised. It was quiet in the way that things are quiet when they don't need volume to land. "You sent those messages," he said. "I read them. You weren't being pushed. You were planning." The room was very still. She cried. Not dramatically. Not the kind of crying that asks for something. It was smaller than that. It was the kind that comes when a version of yourself you've been maintaining for a long time finally runs out of structure to hold it up. She pressed her fingers against her mouth and looked down at the tablecloth and cried, and Andre sat across from her and did not move toward her or away from her. He simply waited, the way he had always waited, for things to be what they actually were. When it was over, he spoke. "The filing stands. Russell is the primary financial target. Your attorney and Patricia will work out what that means for your position." He paused. This dinner was not a negotiation. He stood. He pushed in his chair. Then he stopped, one hand resting on the back of it, and looked at her one final time. "Russell told you I wouldn't fight it." His voice was even. He was right about the rebuilding. He said goodnight to his father and walked out. The front door closed behind him. The room was quiet. Clifton did not look at her immediately. He stacked the empty plates at the edge of the table, slowly and without hurry. Then he folded his hands in front of him and looked up. "You sat at this table for 5 years," he said. His voice carried no cruelty. It was simply true, the way the walls and the floors were true. Sit with what you did in this house before you leave it. He stood, picked up the stack of plates, and carried them to the kitchen. The water ran. The dishes clinked softly. Diane sat alone at the table in the glow of the dining room light, surrounded by the good dishes with the gold rims, and did not move. The filing became public record on a Thursday. Russell found out at 7 in the morning. His attorney called before he had finished his first cup of coffee, and Russell, still in his robe, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse and listened to the words coming through the phone with the particular stillness of a man who is certain there has been a mistake. There was no mistake. He pulled the filing up himself on his laptop. He sat down. It was 61 pages. Every page was numbered. Every transfer was cited. Every date corresponded to a document, a bank record, a title filing, an LLC registration, and each document pointed cleanly to the next one, the way load-bearing elements point to each other in a well-engineered structure. Russell had seen a lot of legal filings in his career. He had seen the aggressive ones and the sloppy ones, and the ones that looked dangerous but fell apart under pressure. This was none of those. This was the work of a man who had been building the case the same way he built everything else, from the foundation up, with nothing left to assumption. 3 years of documentation, assembled with the patience of someone who understood that the right moment to move was not the moment you were angry. It was the moment the structure was complete. Russell closed the laptop. He made 2 calls before 8 o'clock, the kind of calls that are supposed to make problems like this manageable. He had relationships. He had been in this industry for 15 years, and in 15 years he had accumulated the kind of social capital that was supposed to function as insulation. He reached out to the 2 men he trusted most in his investor network, the ones who had been with him on multiple projects, the ones who understood that litigation was sometimes part of doing business at scale. Both calls went the same way, polite, measured, and then the same careful language, delivered with the same professional distance. They would need to place their commitments in review pending resolution of the matter. Russell knew what that meant. It meant they had already spoken to each other It meant they had already done the math. He tried 2 more calls. A developer he knew who had pull with one of the investor groups. A mutual contact who moved in the same circles as the equity fund. But Andre Price's name was in those circles now, in a way it hadn't been 18 months ago. The Forbes profile had done what those profiles do. It had made him a fixed point in a network that Russell needed to navigate, and no one in that network was inclined to reach across and smooth things over for the man named as a primary defendant in a fraud filing against him. The calls did not go well. By noon, one of Russell's active developments, a mixed-use project he had been stringing along on late draws and optimistic timelines, went into technical default. The lender had been patient. The lender was no longer patient. He spent the afternoon on the phone with his attorney exploring options. There were options, technically, but the cleanest one, the one that stopped the bleeding fastest, was also the one that required him to sell. One of the 2 investment properties, the ones purchased with the funds transferred out of the marital account, the ones now sitting in his sole ownership portfolio like evidence, because that is exactly what they were, had to go. It had to go fast, on a timeline that the market does not reward, at a price that reflected the urgency rather than the value. He signed the papers that evening. He had acquired that property with money that was not his. He sold it for less than it was worth to cover a shortfall created by the exposure of that fact. The math of that was not lost on him. He understood it precisely. He simply did not have the architecture to feel it the way it deserved to be felt. He called Diane that night. "This isn't working," he said. His voice was even, almost businesslike. "The situation has become complicated, and I think we both know the arrangement has run its course. You should begin making arrangements." Diane said nothing for a moment. Then she said his name, just once, as a question. He told her he would give her 30 days. He told her he appreciated everything. He hung up. She did not tell anyone for 2 weeks. She kept moving through the days the way a person does when they are holding something too heavy to put down in public. She went to work. She came home. She did not call Andre. She did not call Roderick. She called her mother. Pamela listened to all of it. Russell, the filing, the 30 days, the phone call, with the careful attention of a woman who had always processed information in terms of what it meant practically. When Diane finished, there was a brief silence on the line. Then Pamela said, "Have you talked to Roderick about what the financial settlement looks like for you?" Diane stared at the wall. She was sitting in the living room of the house Andre had renovated room by room over 4 years, the crown molding he had installed himself, the fireplace he had restored from brick he sourced from a salvage yard 2 counties over, the floors he had refinished on his hands and knees over a long Labor Day weekend while she was visiting her mother. She looked at all of it. She sat with all of it. And for the first time, not with guilt exactly, but with something that lived just beneath it, something heavier and harder to name. She understood the full shape of what she had done, not as a series of decisions that had each seemed reasonable in the moment, as a thing. As a finished thing, with edges and weight and consequences, she was only now standing inside of completely. Her mother was still talking. Diane set the phone face down on the cushion beside her and did not pick it up again. The job site was in the middle of a block that used to be a parking lot. Andre had driven past it 6 months ago, when it was still just a chain-link fence and a concrete slab, and had thought, good bones. Now it was steel and possibility. A 7-story mixed-use structure climbing toward a sky the color of cold slate. He pulled up in his truck, tucked his hard hat under his arm, and walked the perimeter the way he always did. Slow, deliberate, reading the frame before he touched it. Some things about him had not changed at all. The civil judgment had closed 4 months prior. Patricia had called him on a Wednesday morning, the same flat professional voice she always used, and read him the terms the way a doctor reads a chart. Accurately, without drama, because the drama was already in the facts. Diane and Russell were required to liquidate the LLC's remaining investment property and remit the full proceeds to Andre, plus interest calculated from the date of the original transfers, plus legal fees. The equity from the house Andre had renovated room by room, the house Diane had won in the original settlement, was applied directly to the fraud recovery calculation. She no longer owned it. Andre had listened to all of it. He had said thank you. He had set the phone down and sat quietly for exactly 2 minutes. Then he had gone back to the proposal on his desk. He did not celebrate. He did not call anyone except Tasha and Clifton. Tasha had said, "Good." Clifton had said nothing for a moment and then, "Come for dinner Sunday." That was the whole conversation. Russell's portfolio had contracted by roughly 40% from its peak. He was not ruined, the math didn't land that cleanly, but he was diminished, and the diminishment was public in the specific way that mattered to a man like Russell. The rooms he used to fill by reputation alone now required more explanation than he was comfortable providing. The Forbes network did not call him back the way it used to. New investors did due diligence that went deeper than it once had. For a man who had built his entire identity on being the one who acquired things, who took things, who moved through deals with the easy confidence of someone who has never genuinely lost, the 40% was not a number. It was a mirror. Andre did not take pleasure in that. He simply noted it the way he noted any load calculation, accurately, without sentiment, and then moved on. Roderick practiced quietly now. He had not spoken publicly about any of it. He took smaller cases that fall and kept his name out of the kind of aggressive divorce litigation that had once been his specialty. Whether that was conscience or strategy, Andre genuinely didn't know. He didn't spend much time wondering. The scholarship program had been running for a year. Price Structural Group funded it annually. 8 engineering students from HBCUs, paired with paid apprenticeships inside the firm, mentored directly by senior staff. Andre had named it for his father before he told his father about it, which was the only part of the whole business that had made Clifton uncomfortable. "You didn't need to do that," Clifton had said at the first ceremony. "I know," Andre said. The ceremony was held in Price Structural Group's main conference room. 8 students, nervous and sharp in clothes that were clearly their best. 8 envelopes. Clifton sat in the front row in his good suit, the charcoal one he reserved for church and graduations, and watched his son move through the room with the particular ease of a man who has finally stopped waiting for someone to tell him he belongs there. Afterward, when the room had mostly cleared and it was just the 2 of them standing among empty chairs and half-eaten plates of food, Clifton put his hand on Andre's shoulder. He held it there for a long moment. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. The Infrastructure Summit was 3 weeks later. A charitable event, design firms, engineers, city planners, all in one ballroom raising money for public works projects in underserved communities. Andre had been invited as a featured speaker. He had given a 15-minute talk about load distribution and community investment that got a longer applause than he expected. Afterward, near the exit, he met Audra. She was an architect. He knew this because she introduced herself that way. Not with a firm name first, the way people do when the firm is the credential, but with the work. "I'm an architect." She had the particular unhurried quality of someone who had learned, through experience, not to arrive at conclusions too fast. They ended up in the doorway between the ballroom and the lobby, talking about bridge design and municipal funding gaps, and neither of them moved toward the exit the way they'd clearly both planned to. They talked longer than made sense for 2 people who had somewhere to be. When they finally exchanged cards and walked out into the cold air of the parking structure, Andre drove back across the city with the particular quiet of a man who has learned not to rush the things that are worth building correctly. Now he stood at the base of the steel frame and placed his palm flat against a beam. Cold. Solid. Exactly where it was supposed to be. He looked up at the structure rising above him. All that engineered intention made visible, holding its weight the way anything built right holds weight. Without announcement, without drama, simply and completely. She told him he'd just rebuild. She wasn't wrong about that either. She was only wrong about what it would cost her. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.